And thank you to the other libraries, Portchester, Portchester-Rye, Irvington, Tuckahoe, and Somers. So if everybody could mute their microphones. And I had a few questions for Victoria first, and then we're all going to have some questions. So I just want to say what a pleasure it is welcoming you. I'm so excited about this. I've enjoyed your work so much. And here's Victoria, this best-selling author who's Zooming with us, and that just makes me so excited.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for saying that, but I wouldn't even have a career without you. So I always feel like I'm the one that is totally grateful because without all of you, I wouldn't even be here. So thank you, and thank you for having me. And thank you for reading more than one book. Like, somebody could read one of your books and then never go back to you.
Oh no, I'm going back. Thank you. And um, you really brought the Harlem Renaissance to life. And Jessie Redmond Fawcett, I didn't know her name. So many names I recognize in there. How did you find her? How did she speak to you that you started to write a story, a book about her?
And isn't that crazy? Like all the other people around her, all the other people who became because of her, we know their name, but I had never heard of her. And I wish there was some intellectual, wonderful way I discovered her, but I don't usually start with people. Because I really want to have someone that I'm discovering because my discovery shows up on the page and the surprise of it, the readers feel, and you're as surprised as I am. So I'm always looking for someone that I've never heard of. But I start by looking in a decade, the decade that I enjoy writing the most. And I love the 20s and I love the 60s for the same exact reasons. They're very visual times, from the way you can describe clothing and the food and the music and everything. And then, so I said, okay, I'm looking this time for a book in the 20s or the 60s. And then I go to cities to see what was happening. And when I looked in the 20s in New York, I bumped into the Harlem Renaissance. Like I bumped to it. It didn't even occur to me that the 20s in New York was the Harlem Renaissance. I was looking it up and bumped into it. And so I said, oh, well, let me see if there's a woman hidden here. And at first I was like, there's no woman hidden here. I know everything about the Harlem Renaissance. There's nothing I could discover here. But I still went ahead and Googled. Google is not the way you do research, but I just Googled women of the Harlem Renaissance, and actually all men came up. Like Google is a misogynist, I'm telling you. But under Langston Hughes, there was a quote that said Jessie Redmond Fawcett was the literary midwife of the Harlem Renaissance. And I didn't recognize her name, and it wasn't even her name that got me interested. It was literary midwife. I was like, what is that? And I went down a rabbit hole and I never came out of it.
I'm glad you did. And you just mentioned Langston Hughes, and it was so interesting to me to meet him as a 17-year-old, to meet these people of stature that I had not imagined in their beginning of their careers.
Isn't that something? That's the best, one of the best things I loved about writing this book, because there was no one familiar. Because Langston Hughes was a legend. In my head, my mind, my heart, he was this 40-year-old legend. County Cullen, the same way. But I got to meet them before they wrote their first pieces. That felt like a gift to me, that I got to meet them. I got to read their letters. I got to know them. I got to know County Cullen when he couldn't even look Jessie in her eye. Or Langston Hughes, that dinner really happened where he was so afraid to go and meet the editor of the Crisis and the literary editor of Crisis that he wrote in his biography. He was so scared he knew if he took his mother, she would do all the talking and he wouldn't have to talk at all. And that really happened. And he was just, from reading his letters, just this sad young man. But they all blossomed under Jesse's nurturing. And I often say, after doing this research and meeting Jesse and meeting them as such young people, I often say that the Harlem Renaissance would have never happened without her. Because the biggest thing I noticed with all of those writers, and I'm a writer, so I get it, is that they needed nurturing. It's just our ethos. It's just kind of like even after all my 30 books, every next book I write, I'm like really scared, and my agent has to hold my hand and tell me it's going to be okay. And that's ridiculous at my age. And it's ridiculous but it's just who I am. And so you have to have somebody there to nurture you. And without Jesse, there were no women there to do that for the other for these young authors, and W.E.B. Du Bois would have never done it. Never. He would have said, snap out of it, you know. And so without her, we wouldn't have had these young writers who became legends.
And no one would ever imagine that about you. Speaking to you, reading your stories. No, no.
With this book, my agent, I submitted what I thought was going to be the best book in the history of books written. And I gave it to my agent, and I was like waiting for her to call me up and say, Victoria, this is the best book in books ever written. And she sent me about 3 weeks later an 11-page editorial letter that laid me out on the ground. I was like, my career's over. I can't do it. I'll never be able to do it. But that's the story of my life with every book.
That's so interesting. And I never imagined that of authors having, I don't know, stage fright. So that's
Oh,
very interesting.
I'm loaded with stage fright. Loaded. I'm always afraid that this is the book, and especially the one that's coming in June. But this is how I felt about Harlem Rhapsody. That people will read it and say, "Oh, it's time for Victoria to go get a job."
No,
Like it's time.
no.
I do. I don't even like to think about it. Like I'm fine while I'm writing it, but once you hit send, it is the scariest thing in the world.
Well, I have a lot of respect for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your research? How you said you start with a decade and a city, and I was so impressed with all the music, the colors, the fashion. That's
Yeah.
a lot of research you did.
Yes. So once I have a subject, it's very interesting because I've written 30 something books, and I've only written Harlem Rhapsody was my third historical fiction. And so, in a way, historical fiction is a little bit easier for me than other kinds of books because I don't have to create. And what I mean by that is the characters there. I don't have to say where they're from. I don't have to say even come up with a name. I don't have to come up with their parents or anything. Their life is there. All I have to do is bring it together. So what I did for Harlem Rhapsody was I went to New York for 5 weeks. And I'm from New York, but I had never lived in Harlem. And I just lived in Harlem. And I wanted to walk around Harlem because so many of the buildings that was part of Jesse's life are still there. The church where County Cullen's father was the pastor, still there every Sunday, a new pastor, not a new pastor, but I don't know how many they've had since his father passed away. And then the apartment building where W.E.B. lived is now a historic building. The apartment where Jesse lived is still there. The YMCA is around the corner where Langston lived. And most importantly, the 135th Street Library is still there, and it's now called the Schomburg Research Center, which has one of the largest collections of African American history and artifacts. And I got to see the Brownie books and everything. So I went to the Schomburg every day like it was my job. I guess it was. And I was there from 9 to 5, and I read two biographies of W.E.B. Du Bois, Pulitzer Prize winning biographies because no one had asked Jessie, like she was totally erased. No one asked for her collection of letters and things like that. Everything you find about Jessie is in WEB's information because they were always together. And so I went and I read two biographies about him. I read every single issue of The Crisis from October 1919 till the summer of 1925. At first, my purpose for reading it, and when I say I read everything, I read every article. My purpose for it, though, at first, was just to get the language of the time. I wanted to speak like them. I wanted that to be one way to immerse you into the story. What I discovered, though, was a whole roadmap of their life. That's where I discovered that they went to Belgium and she gave this big speech. That's where I discovered all of his traveling, everything I wanted to know. That's when I saw where Langston's first poem was in, and I saw where County's first poem. So everything about their life was there. It gave me much more than their language. It gave me their life and what was important to them at the time. And so I did that, and then I read their letters. There's a collection of letters. Some of them have been published into books. Some of them you have to read on microfiche at the library. And I read as many letters as I could. And I didn't just stop with WEB because I also read Langston's biography. I also read another book called Miss Anne in Harlem about the white women who were the patrons. And that's how I found Charlotte. And everything I put in that book about Charlotte is true. And then there was something else that I was going to tell you I read, but I just kept reading. When Harlem Was in Vogue, which is another book that was written by David Levering Lewis, the Pulitzer Prize winning historian who wrote all of WEB's biographies. And so I just read and read and read. And then after about 3 months of just constantly reading, I only stayed up there for 5 weeks, but came back home and worked. Then I start writing, but research never ends because once I have all this information about who the people are, the players, what happened in their life, and when it's time to sit down and write, that's when the details become important. Historical fiction is really about the details and the correct details and the authentic details. So even in the first scene where I had to get Jessie to her apartment, I was like, ooh, she came in at Penn Station, though they called it Pennsylvania Station then. And I said, how did she get to Harlem? Like, okay, a cab, but was it horse and buggies or were they called cabs? What did they look like? So even as I'm writing a sentence, I have to stop to look that up. Then when I wanted to get her into her apartment, I was like, ooh, what did that look like? And so then I looked up floor plans of Harlem brownstones in 1920. Then I was having them walking through the apartment and I was like, ooh, were bathrooms called bathrooms or were they called water closets? So I look, so you're constant, it takes me so much longer to write a historical fiction because it's almost like almost every paragraph, there's something I have to look up. And some of it is just intuitive, like when they were at the restaurant, as I'm typing, I just say, ooh, what's it called, a menu? Like sometimes I will stop and ask and look up something and it was called what it is called now. But there's just this thing in me, this thing that clicks and says, look up menu. And it was called a bill of fare. And so that's why the research never ends to the last page.
I was both read it and listened to it, and the bill of fare came up when I was listening, and I was like, wait a minute, that's a menu, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And then the bee's knees. I'd always heard something's a bee's knees. I didn't know it was a drink,
It
too.
was a drink too. Yeah, I didn't know it was a drink because then when it came to that kind of scene, I wanted to know, okay, so what did they drink? What did they eat? And so I don't just say it's meatloaf. I look up menus to see, and then I see they ate liverwurst and bologna and all of that the stuff that's not very popular now. And so I always down to the food, down like you said to the colors. I want to put the reader right in whatever city or situation that I'm writing about.
What was the hardest thing you had to research?
So I don't think there was anything hard. The most difficult thing, though, to talk about was the affair. I had to make some decisions about that. When I first discovered their affair, I was more concerned about her than him because I didn't want anything to take away from all of her accomplishments. So at first I considered, cannot this be written without the affair? And then I went back, I was like 5 chapters in when I really, because I didn't know about it in the beginning. And then I said, okay, I'll have to lie about why she came to New York. And then I'll have to change her relationship with Will. And then I was like, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. For me to write a biographical novel, it is not up to me to say what belongs in a person's life and what doesn't. This was her life. And to tell her story completely, I got over it. I was able to say that these were just ordinary people who were born the same way we were all born, who had accomplished extraordinary things. They weren't extraordinary people. They were ordinary people who had extraordinary accomplishments, and their ordinariness did not take away from how extraordinary they were.
And you, in your endnotes, were writing about, and I'm not going to get this right, who tells the story, who gets to tell the story. And I thought that was a very interesting.
Yeah, that was a W.E.B. Du Bois concern. And I love the argument that they had. I mean, she didn't know it was an argument. She thought it was their normal debate, and he was just didn't want to be. He wanted her to speak to him in a certain way in public. But I love that argument because there's both sides to that story. For WEB to say only Black people could tell Black people's stories, Jesse's point was then we'll never have any Tories stories told because they're not letting us, right? They're not publishing us. The only place Black writers could be published was in the Crisis. And so I love that debate. He just took it too far.
And I love the record companies, Black Swan Records.
And that was all real. And all the people there, all real. One of the things that I loved about this book, and people told me as they were reading it took them a long time to read because they kept stopping to look up stuff, and everything was real. Just about everything. And the only names I made up were like waiters' names, and things like that. But I didn't have to make up a single person in this book. And that was a beautiful thing.
It did take me a while because I would play the recording. I was like, oh, I have to hear that voice when you talked about the vibrato. I have to hear that voice. I have to hear that music. Um, and it was fun. It was
It
fun.
was fun, yeah. Yeah. I would go, and did you go and listen to like the original recording so you could hear the
Yes. Yeah, the
scratchiness and the
scratches. Yes.
yeah, yeah. It was fun for me to discover it. And that's why I really love writing about figures that I don't know about. Because when I teach writing classes, I always tell people that if you want a reader to laugh, as the writer, you have to laugh first. If you want the reader to cry as you're writing, you have to cry first. And I think one of the things that I've discovered is this discovery thing. Because people say, I was so surprised. I didn't know. And that's because it happened to me first. So I was doing the same things. I'm listening to the music going, wow, how am I going to put this down on paper? The scratchiness of it, the tone of it. Um, every time she walked into a room and discovered a new person, I remember one of my editors was saying, I was just shocked. Here comes another person. I said, so was I. I couldn't believe it. Here comes another person.
Yeah, I love that. That I was, especially as I said, meeting them as young people,
Yeah.
meeting them in the hair salon. It was just so much fun
Yeah.
to see them as real people. Um, did you have their voices? Do you have the characters' voices in your head while you're writing? Are they talking to you?
Yes. And I think that's why it's so important when you can to read their letters, because then I could sound like them. Like, I've had a couple of men come to some of the book signings, and I remember the first time a man raised his hand. He said, I'm only here because I wanted to see the woman who had written a man's voice so well. And so, but that I can't take credit for that because that was just the fact that I had read his letters and I could sound like him. And I'd read Langston's letters and County and his best friend. They were worse than women. They were gossiping about everybody.
That's funny.
But you should read their letters. And then Jesse had them all speaking and writing in French. And I have taken French from like the sixth grade through 2 years in college. I still can't speak it, but I could read it. And so, but I had to then read their French in their script writing, their cursive writing. And I was like, just shoot me now. Like it would take 2 hours to figure out a 10-line letter. Because it would be faded. So some of the words were in, some of the words were out. But that's the beauty of the research.
And that you were poring over microfiche.
I know,
I've
I
read
know.
a long time, and I really appreciate the effort that went into that.
Yeah, that's part of it. And I just all of that is part of my career and I just love it. I just love it. I'm in a discovery phase of we have another book, Marie and I have a book coming out in June, but I'm working on my next solo book, which won't be out to 2028. So I'm in the discovery phase. I'm writing the early chapters and I'm just like discovering and it's so much fun to discover.
I love that you share that with us. You share the joy of writing with us and discovery. It's so wonderful. How do you balance historical fact and your storytelling? I hear that I know they're all real people, but
Yeah.
they're conversations, and I
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that. I spoke to some four children today, who were being homeschooled, and so I was speaking to them, and one of the children said to me, "So, what percentage of your book is history, and what percentage is made up?" And I'm like, "You're 10. How are you asking me this question? You haven't even read the book." So I thought that was so cute. But you know what's so fascinating about that is I can't tell you a percentage, but this is what I can tell you. Every single chapter is based on history. And what I mean by that is I know the day that she arrived in New York, in Harlem. I know the day, I know when she got there. There's some history says her mother went with her, some says she went with her sister. I never found an address with her and her sister, so I chose, because that's what happens sometimes in history too. People recorded things that wasn't true, and you have to kind of wade through it and say, not all history's true. Some histories people's memory, and their feelings and their so I know she was there with her mother, but I don't know what they wore. I don't know what they said. I don't, but I can build the foundation. And even my fiction is based on research. And what I mean by that is when I had them have conversations, I didn't know what they said. But those conversations happened because I had 2 lines in a letter, or I read 2 things in this book. And here's something that's funny. Marie and I wrote a novel called The First Ladies, which is the story of Mary McLeod Bethune and Eleanor Roosevelt and their friendship. And again, a historical fiction. And I was doing a book signing down in Florida, And a woman came up to me at the end and said, "You were wonderful. I really would like you to come and speak at the library that I'm in charge of." And I was like, "Oh, okay, could you?" And I said, the line was long. I said, "Would you mind? Could you just stand over there and I'll speak to you as soon as I sign books." Signed books so long that I almost forgot about her. She stood there waiting patiently. And at the end, she came over and I said, "Oh, okay, so what library? I'll give you my publicist information, and everything." She said, "Well, the library is the FDR library. That's my grandfather."
Wow.
This was Eleanor Roosevelt's granddaughter. I was like, "You should have said something. I asked you to stand over to the side for an hour. I would have never done that." And I'm so glad I didn't know she was sitting in the audience. And I remember her being all animated and and so it was FDR's granddaughter asking me and Marie to come speak at the FDR library. And we went up there to a sold out venue. It was amazing. But when Nancy, because she's Nancy to us now, but when Nancy introduced us, she said that she's read every book about her grandmother. And The First Ladies was the first book that felt like her grandmother. And here's why. She didn't say this, but we get credit for that. Here's why. All the books that had ever been written about Eleanor Roosevelt before this time was nonfiction. They were just biographies. They were facts. You could only state the facts. What historical fiction allows is us to add humanity. We can add what they said. We can add what they thought. But we can only add it based on research. So when somebody's granddaughter says that about us, I'm really confident that it's all the research that we do, because we're also trying to present these people in a very real, very honest, very positive way. We're trying to show the positivity of their lives. And so we make sure that we do everything that we can to present them and whatever life they had in the most positive way.
That's a that what a compliment. I think you're
That was a
wonderful, but
great,
having her, talk
well,
to
it was a compliment when she just came up. She said, and she said the library she's in charge of. Okay, come on now. That could be any library. And then she was like, "Fine, I'll stand over here until you finish signing." No, no, that's not how we do it when you are FDR's granddaughter.
Can you talk a little bit about how you partner with Marie? I mean, I'm sure you don't write, you write this chapter, she writes that chapter. I mean, that wouldn't make sense, but
Yeah, so like we wrote The Personal Librarian together, and that's only one point of view. And people say they could never tell if that was written by two people. So what we do is we talk about the overall concept of the book first. And then we talk about chapters so much that by the time we talk chapters through, they could almost write themselves. And then one of us will say, "Okay, I'll take chapter one, and Maria will take chapter two." And we write based on everything that we've talked about. So we're taking each other's words anyway. And then even once we do that, we send each other the chapters, we switch it. And then we each go through it and things like that. So every word of every book we write together.
that's amazing. It's beyond seamless. I could not tell whose voice was not at all.
Yeah. So with the first ladies, for example, we wanted to go to the places. So Marie did go to New York to Hyde Park for Eleanor, and I went down to Daytona Beach for Mary McLeod Bethune and walked through her house and everything. But then when I was in her house, I was taking video, and actually no, I had Marie on FaceTime, and she was walking through the house with me. And then when she was up in Hyde Park, I was with her. So we still are doing the whole thing together.
And you said you're going to be writing the book that you're co-writing is coming out in June, you said?
Yes, yes, it's all done, all finished. I'm nervous as anything. Marie keeps telling me not to be, but this one it's a little bit different. So I'm very nervous about this book.
Can you share the title or the theme?
Yeah, it's here's a galley right here, a
Oh, wow.
pair, yeah, a pair of aces,
Oh,
and it's about Eunice Carter, who was the very first Black female prosecutor in New York. And her claim to fame is she brought down Lucky Luciano.
wow.
She sent him to prison for 50 years.
A woman did
A
that.
woman did that, but she didn't
Wow.
work alone. That's Eunice Carter up there. And this woman is Polly Adler. Real people, real situation. Polly Adler was the most notorious madam in New York at the time. And so here are two women, one black, one white, on opposite sides of the law, but they both wanted Lucky Luciano gone for different reasons, and they paired up together. And so the thing that makes me a little nervous about this book is that the mob is all in here. And so it's a much more fast-paced book. You know, people can't sit down over tea and ponder things. You know, they're dodging bullets. And so it's different, but people who are reading it seem to love it. So I'm still going to be nervous until a year has passed.
I can't wait. I know people have some questions in the chat, Amy, maybe. I just saw one pop across. Um, let's see. Oh, they can't wait to read the book. Um, New book sounds awesome. And I've been asking all the questions. I bet the rest of you have some questions you'd like to ask Victoria too. So,
Yes, this is my favorite part to talk about question to talk about because then I know what I'm talking about, what you want to talk about.
so just feel free, unmute yourself and just ask away.
No questions?
Hi, Victoria.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Denise. I've been a big fan of your work from like way, way early on. And I was just curious what made you move from Black romantic novels to now historical fiction. It's just very fascinating, the pivot.
Yeah, so thanks for that question because I've been writing forever. I think my first novel came out in 2000. And so and I've never written to a genre. There's some people who would say I wrote Christian fiction. Some people would say it was romance. I wrote a novel called Stand Your Ground that people called social commentary. I've never in my life written to a genre because I always just wrote what was in my heart and I didn't like genres. But then Marie had been writing historical fiction and when she came across the character of Belle DeCosta Green, she discovered that Belle was a Black woman who was passing as white. And Marie felt not for anything else except she wanted the book to be great. She felt that she should write it with a Black author. She didn't know any Black authors. So it took her several years before she read one of my novels, Stand Your Ground. And when she read that, she reached out to me through her agent, to my agent. And so I said, okay, this sounds like a kind of fun project to do. Didn't know her really or anything, but once we spoke on the phone, I kind of felt, yeah, this is good. This is going to be good because you need a writing soulmate, somebody who wants to make the book good, no ego in it. Everything is about the book. And so we wrote the book and it was really good. But then we started editing the book during COVID. And we had to discover this new thing called Zoom. And we were writing a book about race, a Black woman and a white woman, writing a book about race while race was exploding in this country. And we used to get on Zoom every day at 9 o'clock, hoping to get off by 12 or 1. But we spent the first hour of every day, every single day, just checking in with each other emotionally. And it was one of the greatest gifts of my life. We went from being acquaintances and co authors to now she's my sister. Like my sisters think she's really our sister. And her family, like she always says, and this is true, her mother will knock her down to get to me. It's true. It's happened a couple of times. And so we went from this just, writing together to doing everything together, and writing being the most important thing we do together. When we wrote The Personal Librarian, there was no expectation that we'd ever write another book together. She had this one idea, and I would have thought I would have gone back to what I was writing. But we started touring together, and people became as interested in Marie and me together as they were in the story. And we realized that we had a mission here. And so we began to look for subjects of Black women and white women working together. Sometimes they're friends, like Mary McLeod Bethune and Eleanor Roosevelt, and sometimes they can be enemies, like in A Pair of Aces, but still a common goal. And so now that became our mission together. But what happened when I wrote Harlem Rhapsody? Because Marie had been writing solo books, so I said, okay, I need to try one. When I wrote Harlem Rhapsody, after I wrote it, and it was almost like WEB was a mentor in my head, because I discovered that all of these books I've been writing for like 25 years, almost 30 years now, but 25 years, I always thought that I was writing in my purpose. And I realized that those books were just my preparation. I'm now in my purpose now. I feel like I am here now on earth now for a time such as this. While people are trying to bury and erase my history, I can use this gift I've been given to excavate my history. And while people ban my books, I got one of my books is on a banned list, Stand Your Ground. You ban one of my books, I'm going to figure out a way to write two. And writing has become my resistance. This is my activism. And that's how I got here. And that's why I'm going to stay here until the fingers fall off. That was a long answer. I'm sorry, but that's how I got here. And I believe this is my mission now. This is my activism.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have another question? I know you do. Don't be shy.
I know. Let's talk. Let's talk.
So, people are interested in the Harlem Renaissance right now. Why do you think that is?
I think some of it has to do with what's going on in the country. I think the more you try to take away from people, the more people are going to want it. I mean, it's just like a child. It's, when your parents say you can't have something, then you really want it. And I think as people try to take away, people, especially readers, are like, you're not taking away books. Now let me go see if I can discover everybody and everything. Oh, you're going to take away Black authors? That's the worst thing you could say to a white reader. That's the worst thing. They're going to say, I will read every single Black author in the history of Black authors if you do that. And so I just think sometimes it's a pushback, even though we don't even realize that's what we're doing. But that's that it's a pushback. And then I think another reason is last year was the 100th anniversary of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance started at Jessie's party. That really happened. That really happened. And they really stole that party from her. And she wrote, you would have been proud. Every woman on this call would have been proud. Years later, after the book ended, she wrote a letter to Elaine Locke telling him about himself and stealing that party from her. But that was the time. They just felt that women's voices weren't important. He felt he had to lift up the men, especially the young men. And he stole that party from her. And she was hurt about that for years.
And that Took her a long time, you said, to write to tell him that.
It took us several years. I think what happened was, remember, he did a review on There Is Confusion, and he did a nice review. That was the night that WEB took her out, and they were talking to Fletcher Henderson and everything. And then when she wrote her second book, he wasn't so kind. But at that point, he knew there was tension between them, and so he wasn't so kind to her in the review. And she's like, I don't really care what you said because you were a scoundrel stealing that party from me. And she used some words, that were colorful. And there were other words that I wish I was there to give to her to use. But it took her a little while to do it. Although I have a picture of her and Langston Hughes at Elaine's funeral. So at some point they must have made up.
Another story.
Yeah, yeah. And I get stories even from funerals because all I have is that picture, right? But it must mean something because I read the letter she wrote to him. I know how angry and hurt she was, but she was there, so something must have happened. And so that's one of the things about historical fiction. If I was writing a story, I could imagine how they made up. I don't have it in my head, but I would have spent some time looking into that.
Absolutely. Anybody have any other questions for Victoria?
I can't believe it. Did you enjoy the book or I don't
I have
know.
a question. Um, I was just curious, when you discovered the affair between Jesse and Will, and then you kind of switched gears and like decided to incorporate that into the story, did you find yourself getting kind of angry, like just at the situation that like she was in with that, and
Yeah.
how he did talk down to her a lot, and he really did try to like diminish her accomplishments? Like, did you
Yeah,
find yourself getting angry?
I didn't. And let me tell you why. And that's a good question because I write these books with the lenses of whatever decade I'm in. So I always ask people to don't read a 20th century book with 21st century lenses because the values that the people had at that time 100 years ago so different than the values we have today. And 100 years ago, it is crazy to me how we've made some progress in 100 years because women had no agency. Like one of the things you think about in the 20s, you think about, wow, women didn't have the right to vote until then. That was the least of our problems. Like women couldn't get an apartment lease, couldn't have a mortgage. But the worst thing to me was women couldn't even have a bank account. Like that's why I know God made me born in this century because I ain't gonna work every single day and somebody else is managing my money. And these were grown women who could manage their own money. And so they had little, and then also one thing I ask people to consider is that this time period was only 50 years after emancipation. Only 50 years. Now, when I was 14, if you told me that it was 50 years ago, it would have sounded like 500 years. But I turned 70 last year, and so 50 years sounds like last Thursday. And it was a very short period of time. And so it wasn't just WEB who was a misogynist. All men were misogynists, and half the women were misogynists. I read letters where women were saying, I don't want to vote because why should I have to be worried about the difference between a senator and a congressman? I have to worry about my home. I don't. So that's the kind of stuff that made me mad. But then I had to back up and say this was their time. So yes, he did speak down to her, but everybody spoke down to her. It was the time. And so I really put myself into every single situation rather than judging it with the eyes I have now. Does that make sense, Amy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That was kind of how I was also like reading it, but it was still kind of just
Yeah,
aggravating me because of the
yeah.
intimate relationship they had. I was just like, you should have a little bit more respect. Like,
Yeah, and I think he did. Giving her that position was his
yeah,
way
yeah,
of
that was
showing
huge.
respect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah.
she was the first literary editor of the Crisis and the last literary editor of the Crisis. When she left, he had so much respect for her that he didn't want anyone else in her shoes. And nobody
Yeah.
has ever replaced that again. So he did have a lot of respect. He was just a man who had
Yeah.
just and I think he also suffered from personal elitism because he
Right.
really was. He was definitely the most educated black man and arguably one of the top with anybody in this country at the time.
Oh
And
yeah.
so he knew he was smarter than everybody.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he acted that way, didn't he?
He certainly did. Yeah. I think that was like the most jarring was like I feel like sometimes when you think about somebody who's so well educated and so well spoken and can really hold themselves really well, you think that they can also still be dignified in their interactions with other
Yeah.
people, I guess.
And
Especially
so,
when it comes to like in public
yeah.
conversations. Yeah.
But in his time, he would say, how dare you? Women don't talk to men like that in public.
Right.
He would have
Right.
blamed her, which is what he did. He would say,
Right.
how dare you? That's not what a woman does in public.
Right.
So I think, and I'm glad you asked that question because as I was writing, one thing that I kept thinking was she was so far ahead of her time. Jessie did
Yeah.
not belong in the 20th century. She belonged in the 21st century. Because to know not to get married, which was something that was very interesting because a woman couldn't even get an apartment by herself. So you're really not going to get married? You're really going to do this way? And then to dare to dream, to have that dream of something. And then even when she left, because I have had some people say to me, why didn't she leave him sooner? And do what?
Right.
There's two parts of that. It's hard for us to imagine this, but she had one shot. There was only one place where she could get a job. That's hard for us to imagine. And then the second thing is, this is so funny. I did a book signing in Philadelphia this past week. And a man, he was probably in his 30s, was sitting in the front row. And when it got to questions and answers, he said, why didn't Jesse just like leave him and give another brother a chance? Just give another brother a chance. And I was like, wasn't some Billy from the block. He was he was the most educated black man, and she was very educated. At that point, 50 years after emancipation, less than 10% of black people were graduating from high school. Almost half of the black population had been enslaved. It was just such a different time. And it wasn't like she would just, you know, tell him to go away and then cross Lenox Avenue and meet up with the next dude. There weren't many
Right.
brothers that way. And her hands were tied in lots of ways. And I'm not sure she saw it that way, but we can look back and see it that way. And so I think that's what it was. And so I give him a lot of grace because of the time. If we were talking 2025, boy, bye.
Definitely.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for spending time with us, Victoria.
Oh no, I love this. Are you sure no one else has any other questions? I just want to make sure.
I don't have a question, Lynn Hill, but I just want to say how wonderful this was. I'm so glad I signed up. I've got the book on my uh, Kindle right now, and I can't wait to read it. I'm sorry I didn't read it before, and you are amazing. And I didn't even realize that you were co-author on
The personal librarian.
Yes, and I'm shocked, and I've discussed it at my book groups and everything. Everybody I know is going to know about you. That is it. You
Oh,
are
thank
amazing.
you. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Maria
No,
and I
thank
keep
you.
Maria and I keep trying to figure out because you're not the only one, Lynn. So many people don't realize that there are co-authors on the personal librarian. And that has been a little bit of a challenge in my career. But people like you going out and telling everybody, that helps me a lot.
For sure. I'm actually trying to visualize the cover of that book because I loved that book. And I can't remember where your name was.
Hold on one
I want to
second.
see it.
It says Marie Benedict.
It does. It does. Isn't that awful that we missed that?
No, no,
You're
no, no, no.
amazing.
No, it's not awful. You know what? You don't expect to see a second author. So especially if you recognize, remember, this was my very first historical fiction. And so if you don't recognize the name, it almost fades into the background. Do you know what I mean? You
I
recognize
do. I
Marie.
do.
And so you're not the first person. I did a whole signing with Marie, and the lady raised her hand and said, "So did you write the book with her?" And we were like, "Oh, yeah, we've been talking about that for the last hour."
Then I don't feel so bad,
Yeah,
but
so it happens all the time. And even my publisher's trying to figure it out. But I think it's going to be word of mouth. I think it's
oh,
going to be
absolutely.
people like saying, "Did you notice the other name down there?" Because you're not looking for a co-author. So don't feel bad at all. Don't feel bad at all.
We got to
You,
get you on The View. Let Whoopi take care of that.
I know, I know. Yeah, so don't feel bad at all. I thank you for saying you'll tell other people about it.
I have book group next Friday and they're all going to hear it. And
Oh.
anybody else I can talk to. And I can't wait to read this book. Thank you. And thank you, librarians, for hosting this. It was great.
Yeah, this was fun.
We had such a good time. Thank you.
Yeah, and Kathleen, you asked some great questions. I think that's why it was so good. You asked some really, really good questions. So thank you.
Thank you. I love hearing your story. I love reading the story. It's such a and we're
I
all
actually, really quick, I just wanted to say, I actually found this book. I was traveling home from North Carolina. I was passing through Virginia. I stopped off I-95. I went to get some coffee. I found like a local coffee shop, and I was like so tired. I was like, I need to walk around. I found a bookshop. And I went inside, and they were talking about how you were actually going there like in a few days to give a talk
Oh,
on the book.
oh,
And so I bought it right there. And I was
oh, wow.
like, oh my gosh, and then I recognized your name from the personal librarian. That's like my grandmother read that book. She, for her birthday, I think it was last year for her birthday, we went down to the Morgan Library so she could
Isn't
see the
that
exhibit and
amazing?
everything. It's
Did you see
incredible.
did you see the exhibit with Belle?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Best exhibit I've ever seen. I mean,
It
people
was
got it, it told the
great.
whole story, right?
Yeah, yeah. My grandmother absolutely loved the book, loved the exhibit. And she listened to this one on audio after I told her about it because when I came home I was like, "Oh, I know you read The Personal Librarian. I know you loved it. Like she's the co-author of that. You should read this too." And she loves historical fiction. She absolutely loved it. She'd be on right now if it wasn't, past her bedtime, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell her I said hello and thank you.
I will. Thank you.
well, thank you so very much, Victoria. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you everybody who joined. And
Yes, thank you. And thank you everyone for taking your time on a Friday to speak to me. It was great.
thank you so much. Everyone have a lovely evening and
A
oh, I
great
see the
weekend.
clapping and the waving.
Oh, yes, but everybody have a wonderful weekend and thank you so much. Everybody always thanks me, but I really mean this from every part of me. I wouldn't have a career without you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We're so looking forward to the next book.
Yes,
Okay,
can't wait. Can't.
great. Have a great weekend.
You
You
too.
Thanks, you too.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you, everyone.